Good evening, Virgo. Um, they played themselves. Let's just open with that. Um, because somewhere along the way in the timeline of this connection, in the specific sequence of events that led to this moment, they made a calculation, a quiet, probably unconscious, deeply mistaken calculation about who you are and what you're willing to accept. They looked at your softness and mistook it for weakness. They looked at your patience and mistook it for passivity. They looked at the way you kept showing up graciously, generously, without making it dramatic. And somewhere in their mind, they filed it under manageable. Uh, and then you stopped. And now they're confused. Now they're sitting somewhere doing the kind of mental gymnastics that only happens when someone's carefully constructed image of another person suddenly doesn't match observable reality. Uh, they're scrolling back through the evidence, replaying conversations, trying to locate the moment you changed. Except here's the thing, um, you didn't change. You just stopped performing a version of yourself designed to make them comfortable. And the difference between those two things is everything. Uh, so let's talk about what actually happened here, psychologically, structurally, underneath all the surface drama. What is really going on when someone gets blindsided by a side of you they didn't know existed? Because understanding it clearly, not just feeling the satisfaction of it, but actually understanding the mechanics, um, is what stops you from giving it back, from softening again before this moment has done its full work. Here's the psychology. When we enter a connection, any connection, romantic or otherwise, we make rapid, largely unconscious assessments of the other person's range, their emotional range, their behavioral range, their tolerance range, um, and we calibrate our behavior accordingly. If someone presents consistently warm, consistently available, consistently willing to absorb friction without firing back, uh, we unconsciously register that as their baseline, as the permanent condition, as the thing we can rely on remaining stable regardless of what we do. And then we start operating from that assumption. Um, we push slightly further than we probably should. We test the edges, not necessarily maliciously, sometimes just because the edges feel safe, because we've been shown repeatedly that the edge has no consequence, that the warmth will return, that the availability will reset, that the friction will be absorbed and we won't have to account for it, um, until the day it isn't. Until the day you decide quietly, without announcement, without the dramatic speech they probably could have handled and prepared a response for, that the edge is no longer available, that the warmth has been redirected, that the availability has been revoked, that the version of you they were relying on has been retired, and the one standing in her place has a completely different relationship with her own time, energy, and tolerance for nonsense. That moment, the moment they realize the baseline they built their behavior on no longer exists, that's the confusion you're watching right now. That's the slightly panicked recalibration of someone whose operating assumptions just got pulled from underneath them. Um, and here's what's interesting about that confusion: it's not really about you, um, it's about them. It's about the gap between the story they told themselves about who you are and the reality of who you actually are. Mm. And that gap, the discomfort of that gap, is their work to do, not yours to ease, not yours to explain, not yours to soften back into something more familiar so they can stop feeling the discomfort of having underestimated you. Let them sit in it. This reflection invites you to consider: when did you first know that you'd been underestimated? Not suspected it, known it. That specific moment when something in you went cold and clear, and you realized that the version of you this person was responding to was a version you'd been carefully curating to keep the peace. And what did you do with that knowing? How long did you carry it before you let it change your behavior? And what finally made the carrying cost more than the changing? Because that moment, that specific threshold where accommodation became more expensive than authenticity, I that's worth understanding, because it's the same threshold that will come up again in different situations, with different people, in different forms. And knowing where yours is and trusting it when you hit it is one of the most powerful forms of self-knowledge available to you. Um, Now, let's talk about this savage side, because that word gets used loosely and I want to be precise about what it actually means in this context. Because there are two versions of savage and they're not equal. Um, the first version, the one that's actually just hurt wearing a costume, looks reactive, looks like someone who's been wounded and is now weaponizing their withdrawal for maximum impact. Yeah. It's calculated for effect. It's performing indifference rather than actually feeling it. And it tends to crack under pressure because it's not coming from a place of genuine self-possession. It's coming from a place of pain that wants to be noticed without admitting it wants to be noticed. The second version, the one that's actually powerful, uh, looks completely different from the inside. Um, it's not reactive, it's not emotional, it's almost calm. It's the specific, unshakable calmness of someone who has simply updated their assessment of a situation and is now operating accordingly, without drama, without explanation, without the need for anyone else to validate the decision. Um, it doesn't require an audience, it doesn't need them to understand. It just moves differently. And the difference is immediately legible to everyone around it, even when nobody can quite articulate what changed. Yeah. That second version, that's what they're encountering right now. And it's hitting differently than anything they've tried to prepare for, because you can prepare for anger. You can prepare for tears, for confrontation, for the dramatic exit that gives someone a role to play and a script to respond to. Mm. But you cannot prepare for someone who simply stops, who goes quiet not from devastation but from decision, who removes their energy without removing their dignity, who doesn't explain because the explanation is no longer for them, it's for you, and you already have it. Uh, that version of you is not new. It has always existed. Um, it's just rarely been needed because most situations haven't pushed far enough to require it. But now that it's been activated, now that it's been demonstrated, uh, something interesting might be happening inside you alongside the external shift. Because there's often a specific feeling that comes with finally letting this side out. Not triumph, though there might be some of that. Something quieter, something that feels almost like relief, um, like a muscle that's been held in tension for too long, finally being allowed to release. The specific exhale of someone who has stopped performing softness they didn't entirely feel and started operating from the truth of where they actually are. That relief, uh, pay attention to it because it's information, it's your system confirming that the current configuration, the current version of how you're moving through this situation is more aligned with who you actually are than whatever you were doing before. And alignment, even when it's uncomfortable, even when it produces external confusion or friction or consequences you have to navigate, feels better in the body than the constant low level exhaustion of being slightly less than honest. This reflection invites you to consider what else in your life might be asking for this same energy. Because the savage side, the grounded, clear eyed, I know my worth and I'm done negotiating it energy doesn't only belong in this situation. Uh, it belongs everywhere you've been slightly too accommodating, everywhere you've been absorbing friction that wasn't yours to carry, everywhere you've been available in ways that cost you without replenishing you. Where else has this version of you been overdue? And what would change if she showed up there too? Now let's talk about the danger zone. Because there is one, and naming it is part of what protects this moment from becoming something that costs you more than it costs them. The danger is this: they're going to try to pull you back. Um, Maybe not immediately, maybe not obviously. But the confusion you're currently witnessing, that scrambling recalibration of someone whose assumptions just imploded, tends to produce a specific kind of response: a sudden increase in warmth, a reappearance of effort that was conspicuously absent before, a version of them that looks remarkably like the version you needed them to be 6 months ago, showing up now at precisely the moment your withdrawal made that version feel necessary to them. Uh, and here's what that response is actually communicating. Underneath the warmth and the effort and the sudden attentiveness, I preferred you when you were more available to me. I want the version of you that was easier to navigate. Um, I'm not necessarily becoming someone different. I'm becoming someone motivated to get you back to where you were. And that distinction um, between someone who's genuinely shifting and someone who's strategically performing a shift to recover lost comfort is the most important thing you can stay clear on right now. Uh, because your ability to tell the difference is what determines whether this moment actually changes anything or whether it becomes a pattern. A cycle where you reach your limit, pull back, they perform effort, you soften, they recalibrate back to comfortable, you absorb it, repeat that cycle. You know, the one, it's exhausting from the inside and invisible from the outside. Um, and the only thing that breaks it permanently is the refusal to return to baseline when the performance of effort begins. Not the refusal to forgive, that's different, but the refusal to mistake temporary behavior change for structural change. The insistence on watching what they do over time, not what they do in the first 3 weeks after you scared them. Because time, consistent, boring, undramatic time is the only data that's actually reliable. Everything else is performance, one way or another. This reflection invites you to consider, what would genuine change actually look like from this person? Not what would feel good, not what would be satisfying to receive after what you've been through, but what would structurally, behaviorally, in the ordinary moments when nobody is watching, actually demonstrate that something is different. Write it down if you need to. Make it specific. Make it behavioral rather than emotional, because emotional declarations are cheap and behavioral consistency is expensive. And expensive is the only currency that means anything right now. Uh, and let's talk about you independent of them, because that's actually the most important part of this whole moment. Not their confusion, not their recalibration, not whether they come back or stay away or figure themselves out. You, uh, the version of you that just showed up differently. What does she need right now? Not what does the situation need, not what does the relationship need, dot, dot, dot. What does this version of you, the one who just did something genuinely difficult, who finally stopped absorbing what wasn't hers to carry, who let the real range of who she is become visible, what does she need to stay grounded in this? Because the risk, and it's real, is that the external pressure of their response pulls you off your own center before you've had a chance to get rooted in it. Before this new configuration has had enough time to become the baseline rather than the exception. Before the grounded, clear eyed, nobody negotiates my worth without my consent version of you has had a chance to stop feeling like a costume and start feeling like just who you are, because that's where this is going. Um, if you hold it, um, if you don't soften prematurely, if you don't mistake their discomfort for evidence that you've done something wrong, If you stay in the truth of where you are long enough for it to become permanent, this version of you stops being something you access in extreme moments and becomes the operating system, the one that walks into rooms differently, um, that responds instead of reacts. That doesn't explain herself to people who have demonstrated they'll use the explanation to find loopholes. Um, that knows in the bones, not just intellectually, that her energy is finite and therefore precious and therefore not available to everyone equally, regardless of what they've shown her about how they'll handle it. That woman, um, she's not mean. She's not cold. She's not damaged or hardened or closed. She's precise. Um, she loves deeply and gives fully, but only to what has proven itself worthy of that depth and that fullness. She's warm in the specific, genuine way that warmth means something because it's not extended indiscriminately. Um, it's earned. And the people who earn it, they know exactly how lucky they are. They don't take it for granted because they understand it wasn't guaranteed. Um, because they've seen or heard about what happens when someone does, they end up confused, staring at a version of you they didn't know existed, wondering where the manageable one went, um, and slowly realizing she was never actually there. She was just being patient. The power is yours. It always has been. Stay in it. Stay grounded. Uh, Stay precisely, unapologetically, fully yourself, and watch what that version of you builds from here. Because it won't be small. It never is when the foundation is this solid. Take what resonates, softly release the rest, trust yourself. Tell me in the comments what was the moment you realized you'd been playing yourself small for someone who didn't deserve the full version of you. I want the real answer. Drop it below. And what does your savage side look like when she's fully out? Describe her. Let's celebrate her together. Uh, that's all for today. Go be exactly who you just showed them you are. Every single day. Not just when you've been pushed, just always. Um, that's the move. Catch you on the next one.